Okay, so as already Professor Saradindu he has mentioned, I earlier worked with RUTAG, Rural Technology Action Group. I basically a mechanical engineer. I did my graduation in 2010. After my graduation, I joined RUTAG as a project staff. So when we say about RUTAG, tomorrow there is already a lecture also. There I will discuss more details about the RUTAG mechanism and how RUTAG works and how it is connected with frugality. But it is an initiative from Principal Scientific Advisor, Government of India. And interestingly, today in our previous discussion, we have discussed that frugal innovation into academia came in 2008, The Economist, that paper that was published. After that, it was initiated. But RUTAG was initiated in 2005 itself by Government of India. They have started this RUTAG program. So the mandate of the objective of the RUTAG program was that IITs, although they are already doing some technological intervention, mainly known, IITs are known for high-tech innovations and technological development, etc. But PSA office has a kind of, they should also work for rural people of India. So with that objective, RUTAG was initiated in 2005. It was initiated with 7 IITs. Now they have expanded to some other institutions also, but still they are working. Now when I joined RUTAG, actually initially I was a mechanical engineering background, with my education was mechanical engineering background. But when I joined RUTAG, then actually I saw that there is a very interesting work that has been already done by RUTAG, and there is a kind of interesting thing that when you develop technology, there is a kind of, obviously technological side is always there, but there are many more perspectives or insights is required when you develop technology for the rural people of India, because RUTAG objective itself is to develop technology for rural. So with that orientation, I started my PhD in School of Agro and Rural Technology at IIT Guwahati. As part of my PhD work, I work with the pottery industry of India. So basically, I redesigned that pottery wheel, that traditional pottery wheel, which is traditionally these artisans they use. There are many problems in the existing process. Tomorrow I will discuss in details. So I tried to work to redesign it, and interestingly, the final design what I have developed, it was actually proposed by an artisan. We iterated as a designer or as a technological development people. We generally iterate. We come up, many ideas come to our mind. Then we develop prototypes. We try it. And in the process, actually, what happened? One artisan, he came up with an innovative idea. That he said, "Why don't you design in like that way or that way?" So we have reported that case in the Journal of Technovation. So not only that design, there are many other trial and error. There are many other administrative process which is required actually to make frugal innovation happen in a academic institutions like IIT. Okay, because IITs or our government system is highly formalized. But when we say about frugal innovation, there is a informality plays important role. So all those factors I will discuss tomorrow. But here only I want to inform you that so through RUTAG mechanism actually already we are actually experimenting with those factors which are very much important for frugal innovation. Now coming to journals, in academia journal plays important role. Finally we have to publish somewhere, that is important. Now one journal that is I regularly read and they come up with different cases is Journal of Cleaner Production. In Journal of Cleaner Production, if you see many frugal cases very recently they are reporting there. That is one interesting journal. Then another journal generally I follow, because obviously I am from engineering background, so my journal knowledge and everything will be more oriented towards engineering or management perspectives, but maybe Peter will give more insight about the social journal which reported case more also. But in Cleaner Production journal, although it is a engineering or technology oriented journal, you will see you will be able to read many interesting cases of frugal innovation. Then another journal, Technovation. Technovation again published by Elsevier. Technovation also published many frugal innovation cases. Then another interesting journal, that is ASME, American Society of Mechanical Engineers. They publish, they have a journal called International Journal of Mechanical Design, ASME Mechanical Design. In the within that journal, there is a section where they publish design for the developing world. There they don't use the term frugality, but if you read there are many papers already they have reported or they have published, maybe from 2013-14, that trend I have seen from 2013-14, they are regularly publishing papers. So all those papers, if you see, although they don't use the term frugality, but there are also many factors which are, again, you can say it is a frugal excel. They are regularly publishing papers related to mechanical design, which have a very much a frugal component are there, where frugal component are present. So these are the different journals actually which I regularly read, and you can also see. And many cases, there may be kind of important cases where, say for example, that journal, that ASME mechanical design, they have reported a case because it is more engineering oriented journal, and this thing, their frugality case they have not discussed much, but when you read the case, then you will find that there are many insights which is actually related to frugality or frugal innovation. Okay, so this is very introductory, yes, from my side.
Have you come across any particular case study which is related to your frugal innovation and design thinking?
Frugal innovation and design, yes, very good question. So one that paper immediately come to my mind, that I missed that journal. That journal name is Technology in Society. Technology in Society, where one of few of my colleagues from IIT Roorkee only, they have recently means 2-3 years back, they have published one paper where design thinking were connected with appropriate technology. They have not, because terminology it's a confusing, as we already in the previous discussion we have discussed all those things, but again they have not mentioned about the term frugal, but they have reported a case of redesign of a handloom. Handloom, we all know, our handloom artisans or people who are associated with the handloom, they use their traditional handloom. Now if we go to mechanization, then there is a problem, is that we will lose that brand. When it is handmade, then it is a different brand value. Okay. Now in the traditional handloom, if you see, there are many drudgery is associated or involved. Lots of force is required, because they do two things. One thing, they work like this way, another way they work like this way. So it's a lots of energy is required. Ergonomically, it is not that much good or health wise.
So there are cases when I was in AIMS, there are cases of dislocation of
yes, musculoskeletal disorder is a major problem, and if you see an ergonomics point of view. So that is the problem. Now if you go for power loom, again you will lose that brand. Now what they have done, they have integrated a cam and follower. Cam and follower, again a mechanical term. Cam, C-A-M and follower. This is a mechanism actually. By integrating that mechanism, what they have done, they have reduced the amount of that force required actually. So both the, I think one of this motion is automated. See, when you do this part of these handloom activities, whether you do it by hand or some machine, it is means they are doing, it is not fully automated, semi-automated. What will happen? You will get the taste of handloom also. Means they are the way they design. But the thing is that the amount of force required is less. So they have reported that it reduces the drudgery. That is one thing. And second important thing is that it gives uniform force. When it is uniform, then your cloth quality will be better. When we do it manually, that uniformity you will not get. Okay. So that is one case which immediately came to my mind, where they discuss about design thinking and appropriate technology design. But they have not mentioned about frugality, but that is also in a way you can say frugal only.
There was this discussion about over engineering and under engineering. I just try to know your perspective as a design, sort of a problem solving kind of a thing. That what are the dimensions one needs to keep in mind when we are talking about trying to get something under engineered and stay frugal, so that we can qualify it to be, higher functionality perhaps in a certain sense, because like I'm given to understand from a standpoint that there's something called the means ends function kind of situation. Now, would you say there is a corrective to that kind of thinking, or there is something other to it?
Actually, in that case, again, Rutag experience is very much prominent here. So here, Peter also told about these fancy things, na, that when we design, as an engineer, when we design, that came to our mind that it must be more productive. We should increase the productivity, we should increase the efficiency. That generally comes to our mind. And we work in a project which is called, tomorrow I will discuss in details. So it's we were working on means there is a problem in Arunachal, in India, where there is a requirement of feed block production machine. Feed block production machine. Feed blocks actually is a kind of, it looks like a cake. Actually what happens when there is a scarcity of fodder, what you can do, you can convert the raw material, that is grass, etc., into blocks. Okay, and you can preserve it. Say for example, when there is enough grass or enough raw material, you make it block with some addition of nutrients, etc., you preserve it. Now there is a project, some government agencies, they implemented in Arunachal because there was a scarcity of fodder. So then what they did, they brought some machinery from outside India, and productivity was enhanced 4 or 5 times, and it was a hydraulic operated machine. Now what happened, the people who are using those, this machine, they are saying we don't need that much of productive machine because we don't have that much of input material. Then we redesigned, again Rutag took that project and we redesigned things and we developed 2 different models. So this type of things many times happens. Actually, we have also experienced that where initially we assume that we need more productivity, we need more efficiency, which actually lead to actually that over engineering or this thing. Even we have also another example where tomorrow I will discuss this when I work on this pottery wheel redesigning. No? So there is a one terminal, means technical specification, where we design as 5:1. So 5:1 because we use some mechanical engineering principle. As per that optimization of this thing, it came as 5:1. But later when we went for manufacturing, we found that 5:1 manufacturing at local level is difficult because they don't have that infrastructure. Or they had the infrastructure of 4.8:1. 8:1 is a slight difference only. But if we stick to 5:1, we cannot manufacture it, or we have to develop the whole casting process infrastructure. So then we realize that we will compromise a little bit of speed, but it works actually. With 4.8:1 they can work. So then again we redesigned it. So that type of, there are many such examples where actually over engineering, we can reduce this over engineering and we can make product more sustainable for the people.
Any reflection? Raja? Others?
This is interesting, what we are talking about, especially over engineering. I had worked on a particular product which was health related. It was a sort of online platform which was trying to basically provide early diagnosis, and we were trying to also deploy it in the rural areas of multiple Indian states. The issue was, basic idea of that was we were asking symptoms, and accordingly we were asking multiple questions and trying to find some diagnosis. Basic in layman terms. The problem was not all the people were getting those symptoms, because when a patient is talking to a doctor, the kind of terminologies he or she uses is they can't be put in English language. That's one thing. They can't be even put in Hindi language too. Pet gudgud kar raha hai is one term which they use, right? And that is, you can't say it's stomachache, you can't call it, I'm not sure what exactly you can call it, right? So when we try to ask, like put these type of questions there, and also we had to find out the languages, like you have to maybe beyond English, go to Hindi, go to other languages also. We tried Bangla, we tried Punjabi, Telugu, etc. And also we try to incorporate audios, because not everybody could read. In that scenario, you ask these questions, and that's how by understanding that, we were trying to find it out. Now, a particular product which was focusing on trying to maybe make it easier for people which were not, like where hospitals or specialist doctors were not accessible, tried to create this. But as we were approaching towards more and more user-friendly, we were making it more complicated. We were trying to incorporate more AI, we were trying to incorporate more audio-visual functionings, listening to it, understanding even accents, the type of languages which are being used. We did a lot. So the initial intention which was there, maybe it was a little more frugal, provide the accessibility at a very cheaper and efficient price. We couldn't do it eventually. It became more complex. So the designing part which we were discussing, usually over engineering happens even because of this. This has been my experience too. One part like which just I wanted to add here.
Because you want to cater to multiple.
Exactly.
Exactly.
That is one thing. Maybe there is another angle is here also. In design, we regularly use a term called ethnography. Okay, empathize the thing. So many times what happen? Okay, initially we try to empathize. Initially we try to understand the problem. Once we come to the laboratory, then that part actually many times we don't go exercise. Regularly connecting with the people now, that when you design the process, which is called actually co-creation again in innovation literature, that is also many times that also happens. Even because as part of our academia, many times we give some assignment, design assignment to the students. Initially they come up with this type of very interesting problem statement, but when they start doing this design part, there are many logistic issues also, because regularly they cannot visit or sometimes it is difficult. But that is also another angle actually. Empathizing part actually initially we do very nicely, but when we start designing the things, then many times we lose this thing. That is also one angle.
I just want to add the problem which you mentioned just now. I'll tell you, I did a project for Terry. It was related to renewable energy sector implementation in the Punjab belt, and where we are in the rural sector, we were trying to put a lot of solar panels and all. So we want to collect a lot of primary data from the from the villagers and all, the basically looking into the consumption of the electricity and the very, like for example for farming, how much they are using, how much for the household sectors and all. So now if we see, for example, in a urban setup, if we go with a questionnaire and if you can fill up the data and you can get it, but in a rural sector, hardly they will time. Even the lady who is inside, she will never come out of the house. She said, get out of my from my premise and all. So what we came up with a similar kind of a thing. I think it is a part of a frugal innovation. There is a student from IIM Bangalore. She came up with a solution called, there is a platform called Social Cops, and this Social Cops model, it's a very classical model in an Indian context, and in fact her name is Prakalpa Shankar and one of his friend also. Both of them brought out this particular app, which is, even with the help of an internet connectivity, we can collect the data directly from the, based on, you design the questionnaire, put it on the inner social corps, that framework, and if you ask a question, kitna bijli aap kitna bijli karte ho? When I asked the question, kitna bijli chahiye aapko? So that answer which she is saying, it is getting typed there, and later on it is getting converted into English, and we can get the analytics also. So we set up a small center in the village to collect all the data on a cloud, and all the data from the villages of the different villages from the different districts, the entire district, it was collected based on that. So probably you can try with the same in the healthcare sector. You can see their platform also. They got several awards for collecting such kind of a data from the rural sector, especially the primary data, where you have like you talked about linguistics, because I worked in the Arunachal Pradesh projects, so I know how much problem is there on the linguistic area. So that could be a very useful thing we can use. You can have a look at it.
There's a related issue that I think starts from your, let's say, frustrating experience, if you want to call it that, which is very important for constructing the analytical framework to substantiate this overcoming the idea that you have to spend half the time of your PhD on definitional issues, for example. There's a PhD that I'm supervising in Colombia at the moment who's trying to disentangle this, because on the one hand you want to know a number of basic things, the simple things about how that process is unfolding or how the innovation is reaching, and at the same time you have all these contextual differences that make it very difficult to formulate the question. But these are two separate things in a way. What she is sort of working on is sort of what are the key characteristics of innovations that have frugal dimensions. So it's not 0 or 1, but it is sort of a scale. And it is a scale in terms of things like affordability, user-friendliness, these sorts of things. That is separate in a way from how do you ask that question to get to that information in country X, Y, or Z. And it is different in medical, it's different in agro-food, it's different in the water sector. But to make progress on, let's say, the analytical agenda, a key element would be to arrive on the one hand at a sort of a more generalizable set of key characteristics, sort of variables, and on the other hand that context-specific way of formulating your questions. That would allow us to bring this kind of data at a different level of abstraction. And that would be one of the ways forward, I think, for making this kind of research more accepted, but also more fundamentally operational. It's not an easy thing. One of the things that she struggled with, maybe that's a nice example also in this context, is what she is now calling the benchmark. Because for many of these innovations, a key question is, it's frugal compared to what? Because usually it is not frugal in an absolute sense, or not necessarily. An equipment, let's say the power loom, is not frugal, but your innovation, your redesign, is frugal as compared to the power loom.
Yes.
Yeah. So you need a benchmark in your case study framing in order to be able to say how frugal is this innovation as compared to what was the normal thing being used or being serviced. So these are the kind of complications that we need to sort of get through in order to consolidate this line of work. Georgina Gomez, a colleague of mine at ISS, is the other supervisor, and well, you know her. She is a tough woman from Argentina. So together we are supervising this lady from Colombia, who is sometimes, well, not really crying, but almost crying if we again tell her that, this is a nice progress, but because at this stage of developing these toolkits, it is so much easier to criticize it than to actually properly do it. So in a sense, I'm happy that I'm at this side of the table in this process, but still at the same time, what is important is that you try to make sure that she continues to have the courage and the guts to move forward, even though we might sort of kill some of the ideas if we feel that they will not stand up to the rigorous scrutiny of our colleagues.
He is looking at me because he's
There's sort of an associated question since you mentioned the analytical aspect. Probably the heuristic or the interpretation that goes behind inferring that stomach related symptoms or indigestion for that matter can also be a symptom for cancer.
Yes.
But then, to my understanding, other forms of formal innovation were predicated on risk and uncertainty, as in a particular risk and then the probability of that happening. in the scenario that we are looking at, we are not able to generate that kind of hierarchy that, you can't assign a weightage or some sort of priority to the same thing. The fact that you have a stomach problem over a longer period of time has chronic implications as opposed to more short-term implications. So in that sense, probably it's down to the AI model that he was referring to is basically as good as what it has been told.
Yes.
As in the number of cases it has gone through, and it has inferred somehow that, okay, somebody says from a rural background that I have a stomach problem, it means something non-serious. Although there is a big value judgment involved that when a rural person says something, it's considered less painful and less serious compared to somebody from, say, urban background would say. So probably that kind of bias that would come in is also something which is a bit of a problem.
Yep.
But then the fact that the knowledge underlying it is something which is, at least in the informal or the frugal context, more amorphous. It's not like, ready and easy to use like.
Yeah, that's true. At the same time, I think we have learned to exaggerate the precision in the medical field in terms of its mainstream protocols. Because a good friend of mine works in that area, and he increasingly is in doubt about that many of the original clinical tests were done on what is called the white reference man. And that many of the sort of assumed effects of particular kinds of treatments, but also diagnosis, are based on what does it do to white males. And in many cases, the effects are quite different for other, for the main part of the global population. Nevertheless, we have the impression, and we've been taught by the medical profession in a sense that they know exactly what they're doing, and it's all tested, and they have control groups, and they have this, that, and the other, and therefore we can't doubt it. We just need to follow it. But in our case, these people would then turn to us and say, yeah, so you're just sort of doing a little bit of this, that, and the other. This is not serious. So this issue plays at both sides. We tend to exaggerate their assumed level of precision and the protocolization effectiveness on the one hand, and we tend to be too modest maybe and underplay what we can do with the more jugaad kind of approach to a non-linear attempts to find solutions. But that's almost like a statement of aspiration that the world should be a bit different from what it actually is, perhaps. But
Peter, have you come across any frugal innovation in citizen science sector?
yes, yeah. There are actually quite a lot of things happening in citizen science in the Netherlands, for example, at the moment. It used to be more based on, let's say, the sort of first generation of citizen science in the Netherlands is that you ask citizens to count things for you, like how many birds do you see in your garden and stuff like that. But increasingly, citizens are becoming involved in more complicated, research is a big word, but research-related activities. And we see quite some innovations in how to use certain apps and how to use, maybe develop new algorithms from these kinds of experiences. Also because the data numbers are quite large and lots of people participate. I remember we had a discussion on citizen science some time back. And one of the things in the citizen science literature is that they say, well, the only reliable citizens are middle-class people who have the time to go and sit in their garden and count the number of birds. That's sort of the shorthand version. But of course, there are many more people like that in a country like the Netherlands, relatively speaking, as compared to a country like India. So the amount of data that you can collect and therefore the sort of new things that you can develop through using that data is quite impressive.
Yeah, please. Megha?
Yeah.
I just had it could be a clarification of something. While Bhadri sir also stressed on the point that maybe talking about frugal innovation, it is about collaboration. So while we are going to the traditional thing like user-based innovation, so is it similar? I mean, because because producer innovates and then user kind of give their comments to be innovated better and better. So can we say that some sort of thing, I mean, the parameters or the features of user-based innovation can be in frugal-based innovation also? Is it so?
Yeah, I would say so,
Yeah.
but I think Saradindu is the expert on this.
Well, not really. I haven't worked that much on user innovation. But user innovation has, I mean, it means multiple things also. Huh? Sometimes it is a kind of a user telling the producer to do certain things, and then it is done to customize it. Two, where the users are also sort of customizing it themselves. And some of these things can indeed be categorized as frugal innovation. But why? The question is why? Because it doesn't make things necessarily cheaper or inexpensive. But I think it will fit into the logic of making technology more context specific, or developing a technology based more on experiential knowledge. I mean, that's how it can be ranked or categorized as frugal innovation. But these are categories with not complete overlap with each other. And that is something we have to keep in mind.
Yeah, and I think the quadruple helix idea, like Vibhuti will talk about tomorrow of a case study in India, the Dutch experience with quadruple helix is very much this idea that you have to have all these different actors involved in a co-creation process in order for these innovations to be able to do what they originally intend to do. Whether they're frugal or not is then maybe a second issue, but they need to be embedded in a sense and sort of validated through science by the knowledge institutions, but they also have to respond to the real needs in civil society. They have to be approved in a sense by government actors, and the industry has to see a business model. Now, if all these four, for their own reasons, feel that this is the next thing to do, then you can actually make progress. And that is sort of, they call that the Dutch diamond. I'll talk about that tomorrow. But the Dutch became famous within Europe also for using that in, especially in the water sector, where the Dutch, of course, have a big reputation, and in the agro-food sector, on how these things are done. And there is a kind of a myth that they are all friends and that they work together and everybody's happy, because usually this happens also with conflicts of interest and fights and hierarchies and this, that, and the other. But there is a strong tendency of what in the literature is called a collective amnesia about all the fights it took to get to that point. But once you are there and everybody's relatively happy, then everybody forgets about what happened before. And they all say, look, we can do this. You should be able to do this. Yeah, I remember, when was that? 2 or 3 years ago. I was part of the royal visit to India with the King and the Queen of the Netherlands, and it's a sort of a trade mission. So with all the CEOs of big companies, etc., and some crazy academics like me. So we had the pleasure of being there, and then this Dutch diamond was sort of sold to the Indian audience, like, well, this is what you need to do. And during the breaks, I would talk with people from the NGO sector in India or from the corporate sector, government, knowledge institutions, and they would all say to me, "No, this is a crazy idea. This will never work in India." But partly the reason for that miscommunication is that the Dutch forget to tell the story about all the fights that were there in the process of getting to these co-creation processes. Yeah, so they have sort of polished the story in a way. But I'll talk about that more tomorrow. But this is a really important part of the story that I usually, when I try to explain issues of frugal innovation, also in Africa, to our students, I say one of the key characteristics of these kinds of innovations, like with many innovations, is that they are not something done by one person or by one actor. It's only, usually at least, when different kinds of knowledge start to connect, that something new and original becomes possible. Now, if you are in a society where crossing these borders between different kinds of actors are high, the likelihood of these kinds of innovations to arise is smaller. So that is really a critical issue when it comes to, let's say, the policy making for stimulating these kinds of innovations. And that's, I thought, one of the really interesting things of the case study that you will talk about tomorrow is about how they have tried to overcome some of these barriers and partly succeeded also.
Yes.
And what I then usually talk about with the Dutch example is that, yeah, we succeeded in overcoming these things, but always temporarily and selectively. Because in that process of the fight towards that success, lots of people dropped out. Yeah, that's one thing. The other thing is, once the success is there, of course everybody's happy with the success, but before you know it, 2, 3, 4, 5 years later, maybe 10 years later, some people try to take advantage of it beyond their proper share. And then that whole process can fall apart again. So it's not, let's say, a model that will work forever for everybody. No. Anyway, this is, but this is really an important point if you look at the title of the course. Yeah? Knowledge interactions are of the essence here. So it's not only about the individuals, but it's about how they come together.
So Padmaja, Ali, and then Manjana.
So, my question is kind of related to what Paul was talking about. When we talk about frugal innovation, very fundamental phrase comes to mind, context specificity, and that we kind of try to disregard the notion of one size fits all. But then there's also the question of scalability of frugal innovations.
Yeah.
So if innovations are specific to contexts or settings, then how do we overcome this kind of paradox, or how do we know when to stop scaling up, or like where to put a limit to it? So then, and also without scaling up, how much do you think that conventional technological discourse will accept frugal innovation as a, I mean, not just acceptance, but even generate interest in the discourse itself? So how do you think we can navigate this issue?
So this was actually the question in my interview at IIT Roorkee.
Okay.
And I have kept 2 slides for tomorrow, so I will not go in detail. I will explain. Actually, RUTAG is, when I was in IIT Guwahati and as a RUTAG team at IIT Guwahati, because RUTAG has 7 centers, I told you. RUTAG IIT Guwahati, actually we did some experimentation regarding this one, scaling and how to address that problem. And we were partly successful actually. Tomorrow I will, with example, I will discuss.
Okay.
Ali, my question is simple, like user innovation. So, user innovation, can you compare that the social shaping of technology? Because in my case, I'm working on Sivakan policy making in the lab, science and technology policy making in the lab from a grounded theory approach. So, there is one organization named Bihar. So BRDO, Bihar, so it's a very formal organization. So Bihar came up with the technology to how
how to harvest, the berries from the sea buckthorn. Sea buckthorn is a plant there in Ladakh. It's a very spiny sort of bushy kind of plant, so it's very hard to have the berries pick up from the things. So now the people, they give their feedbacks, sort of user innovation. They came with the idea that how to pick up the berries if we have a formal technology on that. So later on, we have came up with that harvester. So my question is like, because the feedback comes from the user, the one who is on the ground. So that user innovation can be better than the social shaping of technology, because the user, he or she is a part of the society.
No, I think only the participation of users is, we cannot say it is a social innovation. No? So there are many other elements, whether all those are addressed or not. Say for example, all MNCs, they also take feedback from the user. It is not like that they don't take the feedback.
Not only feedbacks, they gave the person who gave the idea exactly how to come up with the design. Right? For example, in your case, you get that whole innovation idea from an artisan. So can we compare that with a social shaping of technology in your case also?
No, then another angle came. He mentioned about that IPR, no? IPR case. So what type of policy followed for IPR, etc. Say for example, I told no, that for RUTAG we developed certain different, not conventional, different, unconventional IPR policy. Similarly, whether those things, other factors are applicable or not in that case. Based on that only, we can say it is social innovation, maybe. It is a kind of qualitative, there is no such, I think.
Yeah, but if you call it social shaping of technology, of course, I'm sure that can be called a social shaping. Or you can go one step forward and you can say it's a social construction, because they are participating in the process of making the technology. It would not be in conflict with those standards.
So I have two questions actually, but I don't know how to put it, but I'll try to be as much as clear I can be. So first thing is that with the AI hype that we are currently seeing, every problem that we are trying to approach to, we are trying to apply AI, that AI can solve your health problem, AI can solve your climate change problem, AI can solve this. But in trying to use AI for everything, we might lose on maybe regional technologies, or maybe frugal innovations, as we are discussing right now, that can be addressed better and a more efficient way with that frugal innovation than AI technologies. So are we on a path to again losing that importance to frugal innovation when it is compared to when compared to AI technologies? Another is, we have discussed that there are various characteristics to categorize something as a frugal innovation. So I just want to understand how can we classify the recent advent of DeepSeek in the case of China, which they developed a low cost, which is minimal cost, and at the same time minimal environmental impact, but at the same time it is very effective. In the sense, it offers the same effectiveness as the ChatGPT is offering. I'm referring to DeepSeek example because as any AI tool, it can be also applied to solve many problems of society. For example, the simple as maybe a chatbot for interacting with a remote villager. Definitely, it had to be be context effective if it is to be applied in Indian context. So how do we see the emergence of AI, and when we are talking about small language models in comparison to large language models that we are also discussing? So how we are trying to solve this dilemma? I hope I am trying to put it correctly.
Roger, any take?
I'll try to listen to answer. I have some takes, but after that I'll
Well, you can go first if you want.
Okay, so 2-3 things. I have read your paper on digital frugality and digital technologies, basically. So again, to what she's saying, I'll try to answer that afterwards. But one thing, when you were looking in that particular paper on digital technology and frugality, maybe AI, how do you see that as part of frugality, and how enabling that is? Her question is a little different, but I am talking from the perspective of AI is making it more enable, more frugal in many things which we are doing. Forget about LLM, forget about how they are being manufactured. Forget about how sustainable or unsustainable that is, because even IT or information technology or digital technologies or WWW is not sustainable in many forms, right? But we are using that. You mentioned UPI in the first lecture. It is making things enable. It is making things frugal, right? More accessible, more affordable, more efficient, more economical, right? It is making things frugal. So why not AI? Because we are not talking about how actually this WW is being made. Same thing with AI. So that's one question. Second, when we are talking about DeepSeek, the problem of IPR will come into picture. That's definitely there, because that is one problem. Whatever data we have received till now, there are lots of gray areas and dark, like it's a black box, right? So we have fined $5 to $6 million was spent, only 10 to 20,000 high-end GPUs were used. Okay, fine, but how did they get it? Because US, again, it's a very complicated thing, but US has squeezed all the supply of it. India is struggling from it. How China got it? Obviously not through legal means. And then again, then comes the IPR part, and also it is not necessarily true that whatever they have disclosed is the reality. So technology transfer, IPR, from which base they are starting, all of these factors are coming into picture, and so that's why DeepSeek is a fine example, but I won't say it's a good example for frugality. Maybe if India can do it, it will be a better example.
If we can go beyond the goodness and badness of it, it does at least do one thing. It challenges the existing relationship between technology and regulation. Right? I mean, and it also asks this question that, okay, if you want to make something frugal, how would you respond to the needs of intellectual property rights and other regulations? So, what Rajat says that it is not legal, I would say, the laws are also not written on stone, right? Laws need to evolve. I think, so it does challenge that notion. It does challenge that, okay, if the existing regulatory structure may not be appropriate for frugal innovation, if it is frugal. Then you have a second question.
No, I don't
Okay.
have a second question. Just to think that when we talk about the regulatory architecture that we currently have and the illegality of DeepSeek, in that sense, we must also acknowledge the fact that OpenAI is also facing so many legal suits across the world. So it's not, and IPR is an evolving issue. I think everywhere across the world, people are debating like how to deal with this question. AI, copyright, IPR. Keep it aside and then discuss if we have a licensed data, we have taken the explicit permission of the data principle. Now what we are calling in India. So then what? Are we taking this into consideration that AI can sometimes be like incorporated into frugal innovation? Because one thing which I like, what I have read till now, what I find is a very problematic thing in India is the lack of quality data. When you go to the ground and ask for a data, then definitely the problem that you highlighted is a major problem. Whatever the cases I have been reading around AI, because my research interest lies around AI and digital ecosystem. So that is something which is important and how we are trying to solve it, because that's, and also it relates to the question of scalability, and when we are trying to like, if we are developing an AI model, for example, a small language model, not a very large language model, and then we're talking about how much we want to scale it, in a sense, also considering the fact that we do not have the quality data with us. So that's my question, the intersection of AI and frugal innovation, how do we see it? How are we trying to classify AI in this frugal innovation discourse that we are doing?
I think these are important.
Yeah, it brings me back to the earlier comment I made about this PhD from Colombia on the benchmarking and the trying to have objective ways of classification. I think DeepSeek, if you take OpenAI from Silicon Valley as the benchmark, is the frugal version. Does that mean it's good or bad? Well, that depends. But it is more frugal, probably, if you would then have a list of criteria that you would come up with in your research, and you would contrast these two models. That would, I think, be the way forward. When I look at it from a frugality perspective, that both are interesting to study, and probably AI in general, we have no clue what it will mean for frugal innovation or frugality. But inside the box of AI, DeepSeek definitely is the frugal version of OpenAI. And you could, in that sense, do a useful comparative research on that.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that this discussion, so we worked on a particular sort of health diagnostic tool, which will detect a few things based on, say, the light. It will not be non-interventional diagnostic tool. Now, and it was sort of, it made things very accessible. Diagnostic technology is very accessible, etc., etc. Until the time someone asked the question that, but what about the privacy aspects of these the data that they collected? And so, what we really observed here is that, frugality, and that is something I think Peter had started the first lecture with, that the first generation research on frugality was about finding some cases and feel excited about it.
Yeah.
And things have definitely gone beyond that.
Those days are over.
So, now we are asking these questions. That, okay, this makes, diagnosis accessible, but then you are collecting data. What would happen to this data? Who is going to use those data? And the moment you incorporate that in the legal structure, you probably find that it no longer remains as accessible or as affordable as it was supposed to be. Right? So this interface between technology, regulations, and whatnot is what is coming up, as a big issue. And I'm not saying that all the laws that we have with regard to privacy are to be celebrated either. All I'm saying that it needs to be problematized in the context of innovation and technology.
In that case, data can be personal data.
Yeah, all those things are being tried, that you anonymize it to the extent, but then if you anonymize, does it hold relevance when it comes to mapping of diseases with population and demography? So these are, that's how things are. But yeah, I mean.
Another example for DeepSeek, that is ISRO, Indian Space Research Organizations, they are sending satellites. Those are also frugal because of low cost and
Again, compared to others.
compared to others.
Compared to US, it is frugal.
Yeah, so
That is-
also there, the benchmark is an important issue. I remember, what's his name, Dr. Rao from IIT in Madras, in Chennai.
Oh, Balakrishna Rao.
Balakrishna Rao, that's the one. He was at my institute in 2016, 15. And he did a presentation on frugal missiles, rockets from India. And all of us in the room were thinking, what is this guy talking about? Because we started from the grassroots innovation thinking and the bottom of the pyramid thinking. So we were conditioned, in a sense, to think about small, simple, affordable, cheap things. And then he came with the rockets. But if you now look back and you say, okay, if the benchmark is NASA in the US, then these are definitely frugal rockets. At the same time, his recent research by Balakrishna Rao is distinguishing in a different way. He's now talking about the difference between what he calls advanced frugal innovations and unrefined frugal innovations. Leave aside the terminology, what he means to distinguish is, on the one hand, these sort of more higher end but cheaper, effective, high functionality solutions. So you can have a rocket and it can go to the moon, but you have only maybe 20% of the costs involved. And it can't do everything, maybe that the NASA thing can do, but it can do the important things. And the unrefined, in his terminology, frugal innovations are the sort of local grassroots type of innovations. And of course, he calls that unrefined in an almost derogatory manner because he's not interested in those innovations. His interest is in these relatively high-end frugal innovations. So he says all that other stuff is not important. I think our take is different in the sense that we want to see what is the commonality across the board in trying to make these things more frugal, keeping in mind your benchmark and more objective criteria to classify dimensions of frugality. Anyway, we are.
So we still have maybe 10.
Yeah, there was.
Yes.
Yeah, you had your question already ready.
So innovation, I understand innovation as embedded in the political economy of any society. So now when you talked about imitation and how imitation is an art, there is a term known as invisible infrastructure. So when I say in the Indian context, if I want to propel frugal innovation forward, there is the Indian invisible structure. There's a regulatory system, a compliance system, an investment structure. So I needed a conceptual clarity as to when you talk about frugal innovation, do you say that it is an innovation which is despite the structure in place, or even creating, say, even identifying gaps in the existing policy framework could be frugal innovation? So
What do you mean by invisible structures?
invisible infrastructure, for example, in the Indian context would be that you have a certain, you have, say, limited state capacity, right? And then you have certain constraints in the investment capacity of the country. What is the environment? Is it conducive enough to propel frugal innovation forward? So do we do it outside the ambit of the policy structure of the country, or
Okay, yeah.
do we?
That's a good question, because I mean, of course, they would.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Say, but again, I mean, if we go back to this first generation discussion on frugal innovation, they did use this term called institutional void. What they meant by institutional void was where formal rules, regulations do not work that well. I mean, do not work doesn't mean that they don't exist, but maybe there's not enough capacity to sort of implement those institutions. And frugal innovations happen in those areas. So, but later on, we have probably refined that term. We do not call it institutional void, because institutions mean not only rules and regulations, but also norms, conventions, customs, etc. So we would not call it institutional void in that sense, but yes, what you are trying to get at is very relevant there. That probably, the more of these informal sector innovation type frugal innovations are happening where there is no clear boundary of regulatory separation. For example, tomorrow or day after tomorrow, we might have some interaction with Shekhar Jain, who did his PhD on Jugaad vehicles on daily roads, how they are regulated, how innovations take place, and it's a complicated story there. But you are right. The Jugaad cars would be developed in India and not in the Netherlands, because India offered some invisible infrastructure, both positives and negatives. And this is actually a very fertile ground of next generation frugal innovation research. How do you characterize this invisible infrastructure? What does it really mean? It's very similar to the way technological progress was understood in first generation research in economics. They called it residual, meaning something which cannot be explained by capital or labor. And what you are referring to is very similar to that, which cannot be explained by what is existing. But the challenge is actually to try and analyze these and examine what do you mean by this invisible infrastructure. Sorry, I mean, if there is anything to add.
No, I was just thinking that this is already a fascinating discussion because people are bringing in different people from their own experience, from their own sort of research backgrounds and interests, their own jargon and their own choice of words, and we're trying to find a more common language. And I think that's that's a very good start for a first day. So, yeah.
We also feel motivated.
Yes.
Who else had raised their hand? Yeah, okay, Shakshi, sorry. Yes.
Sir, my question is in context with the third category of frugal innovators that we talked about, the individuals who innovate to solve the problems in their own community. So, sir, do you think that frugal innovation is confining these people to very little development and subsiding the question of equality of resources? And this I'm also asking in reference to the conflict that comes in my mind when I go for my field visit for studying frugality in incremental housing. And what I always feel is that no amount of jugaad or frugality can make their housing as good as mine or yours.
Yeah.
So, what is your take on this?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you're right that you cannot to use an expression that maybe doesn't exist, you cannot jugaad yourself out of that setting. So there is a clear limitation to the extent that these solutions will propel you into a completely different setting where you would be starting to use the latest technologies, construction materials according to modern standards, etc. So yes, there are clear limits to that. This is one of the reasons also, I think, why innovation scholars used to ignore the informal sector altogether, because they felt that there was not going to be any real sort of radical breakthrough innovations from that area. But what we have learned in the meantime is that within the context of these informal settlements, for example, there is a lot of creativity and ingenuity that we can learn things from if we analyze that properly. That doesn't help the individual person to sort of grow out of that system just like that. But it offers opportunities to learn things about how creativity and ingenuity work in these settings that are also of relevance in other contexts. But if you think in terms of what the lady in the back referred to as the sort of the scaling issue and the impact issue. So for me, scaling and impact are the next frontier for frugal innovation research. We haven't done much on that yet, and we need to do it. So when people come to me now and they ask for me to supervise their PhD, and I say, I will do something on frugal innovation, I have a nice case study. I say, I don't want any case study anymore. I want studies on scalability and impact, but these stories will be different for the different categories. You very clearly started by saying, my question is about the third category. So that helps to be clear about what are we really talking about in the real world. Because for the other two categories, the scaling issue is different. The impact issues are different. And there is no magical bullet in the sense that by doing it in a frugal way, you could magically get out of that informal settlement and get into mainstream construction. And we need to be aware of that limitation. But it shouldn't stop us from realizing the importance and the relevance of studying also the dynamics and the innovation processes in these different segments. So that was the long answer. The short answer was yes, you're right. But yeah.
And in addition to that, in this direction, say for example, there are many research going on in different IITs, 3D printing, 3D printed houses, etc. Obviously, further research is required, or there is a scope that maybe, in that case, maybe that input of investment on this technological development, etc., may not be frugal, like our digital payment system, that may be complex. But user's point of view, maybe 3D printing is an opportunity which may give them a kind of affordable house at a limited time.
Which
Maybe.
kind of materials they are using?
No, for that further research, etc. required. I am also not, I have only, I know some groups.
Plastic and metal.
No, that
Those are not required in the.
no, that is why, that is why I am saying further research is required. Maybe we may come up with solution for that one also.